Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's keynote. Sorry for the picture in the end. This is just to get your attention. We'll now start. My name is Meike Watzlawik. I am the moderator of today's talk, and I'm happy to introduce Thomas Stodulka to you. He is a junior professor of social and cultural anthropology with a special focus on psychological anthropology at the Freie University of Berlin. His work focuses on the interplay between affect, emotion, childhood and adolescence, mental health and illness, stigmatization, datafication, and ethnographic methods. He conducted long-term field work with street-related children, young men and women in Indonesia between 2001 and 2015, and he has directed international research projects on the role of affect and emotion in fieldwork and ethnography, envy in transcultural perspectives, and critical perspectives on interdisciplinary emotion research and big data. He co-directs the methodology lab at the CRC Affective Societies at the FU Berlin, and he is currently preparing new research on the translocal entanglements between cultural ecologies, permaculture, education, and politics in Timor-Leste and Indonesia. The title of today's keynote is Tracking Corona, a Transnational Anthropological Detective Story. And I'm very happy to give the stage to Thomas at this point, who I would invite to turn on his camera and his microphone to join me here. Takes a few seconds. There he is. Hello, Thomas.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And I hope everyone else can as well. Everyone else is, while you're talking even, invited to use the Q&A tool at the bottom in the menu bar. So feel free to pose questions along the way. I will take notes and pass those questions on to Thomas once he's done. And then we're happy to enter the discussion after the talk, which is live, as you notice. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions you'd like. I'll see you after the talk. And Thomas, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Well, Meike, first of all, thank you very much. And apologies, I also tried to get your attention through the picture of my wife because I'm using her computer. Good. So I don't know who's online, but I assume there's also some colleagues from around Berlin, some friends and colleagues from the Indonesias. Hi. This is very exciting for me. And since I'm a little bit nervous also, since that's my first virtual conference, I will jump right into it. Okay, so let me just share the screen and start the PowerPoint presentation that I have prepared. Good. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to take you on a journey, on a reverse journey that's going to start in Eastern Indonesia in Kupang, and it's going to end about 50 hours later, and using many different vehicles across many different airports and 2 continents, and then ending up in Berlin. But of course, not only that, I'd also try to frame it a little bit within theoretical concerns that sit at the cusp of psychological and anthropological theories. But I promise not to be too theoretical. The theory is not going to last longer than probably 3.5 minutes. Good. The keynotes and panels that I have so far attended at the conference, they touch upon global crisis in the context of climate exchange, exploitation of human labor, budget cuts in health sectors around the world, traffic and pollution in megacities, wars and systematically forced migration and mass killings, the detention of minorities, refugees, and asylum seekers. The list is not exhaustive and can be extended according to our expertise and practice as researchers, our commitments and solidarities as engaged activists, or to the extent that we ourselves are being affected by, affected by global crisis in our everyday lives. So why am I adding another another presentation on Corona, you might ask, whereas other research topics are so brutally marginalized within these days. So this is why it directly butts into the core dimensions that shape me, myself, as a person. First, Corona affects my practice as an empirical ethnographer and researcher. Secondly, it pushes me to reflect and put into action solidarity with my family, with my friends, neighbors, and others more vulnerable. Third, it deeply jeopardizes my everyday life, my feelings, and previously established routines of leading an everyday life. In the following around 30 minutes, I promise not to be longer than that, I will focus on the relationship between feelings, affects, emotions, with regards to Corona-related banners, posters, signposts, signs, mediatized messages, and objects that address us in the public spaces. I will draw on orders of feeling as a theoretical lens in order to frame my own observations as an anthropologist and reflections vis-a-vis signs, pointers, and warnings along a journey that begins in Kupang on the island of Timor in eastern Indonesia and ends in Berlin, Germany.
Thomas, just a quick question.
Yeah.
Like we only see the map at the moment. Can you go into presentation mode? I don't know.
Okay. So let me try to put it. Can you see a different slide now?
Yes. Now it's like the two or three orders of feeling.
Great, great.
Yes.
I'm just going to guide you briefly. You didn't miss much. You missed this lovely painting, which is a mural in the city of Kupang, and you missed this one. So that's the third slide. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thanks, Meike. So let me turn to the orders of feeling, just a brief, the only text slide I have. So orders of feeling refer to discursive orders that leave their marks on individual and collective emotions, and they shape socially, culturally, and which slide do you see now, Meike? The 2-3 orders of feeling?
Yes.
Great, good. Orders of feeling refer to discursive orders that leave their marks on individual and collective emotions, and they shape socially, culturally, and politically prescribed feeling and display rules. Orders of feeling impact subjective experiences vis-a-vis social norms and political orders. They influence whether, how, with whom, where, and when affects, feelings, or emotions can be articulated or performed. Moreover, as we also see now in the current context of a global pandemic, we witness how epidemiological, political, media, and social media discourses publicly position signposts, banners, and other material objects directly affect how we feel, what we think, what we do, where we go, whom we visit or don't visit, and how we maneuver our bodies through the public spaces. With regards to COVID-19, signs and signposts pursue the aim that persons, collectives, and whole societies fall in line and adhere to the newly established orders of physical distancing, alerted hygiene, and staying at home. Can you see photos now? Meike?
No, we cannot see the photos yet. You might see a pause sign, an orange one on your screen. If you can click on that.
Okay, let me just custom this.
Yeah.
Wait a second.
No worries.
Oh, there, sharing is pause. Bring your shared window to the front. Great. So what do I do with it?
Try clicking on it.
Okay. It says live.
Yep.
Oh, I know. We have enough time. Don't worry. Stay tuned in. It's just that I think it's my fault. it's my presentation probably, because it goes on automatically, which is not so, it's not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
So let me just briefly fix that and then I'm back on track, I hope. So I stop sharing first.
Yep.
Then I
Because
get
just
back.
we saw the toolbar also and everything, so.
Okay. Here we go, good. So.
Your nodding was a good sign, so I guess we'll
Yeah,
be
I
able to fix it
think,
soon.
I'm not sure. Because I need to get into this menu. Can anyone help me here from the audience? Okay, good.
Then you go to share screen, Bildschirm freigeben again.
Okay, now I got it. Okay, on mouse click and then apply to all. It should be fixed now.
Okay.
Good. Am I blushing? I think I am blushing. Yeah.
Not noticeably yet. So.
Okay, so sorry for that. Let me get back into it. Good. Good. Let's try. Can you see two pictures? Photos.
No, we still see the toolbar and the sort of the content, like slide 1 to 11 on the left-hand side. We do not see the presentation. Here we go. That looks great now.
Oh, now it's green. That's probably a good sign. Good. So I was rambling on about the theoretical advantages of orders of feeling, which is something that I think makes sense to pay attention to with regards to how it affects us as individuals, as communities, and probably even as societies. So what I'm after in the next 25 minutes is to see and have a look along this transnational journey, to have a look what different signs are actually at play, and how they impinge on the bodies and what kind of effective dimensions or affective effects they can have on our experiences, both as persons and also as social groups and communities. So these are two pictures from at the entry of a mall in Kupang. It advises you, and these are the very early days of the COVID. So this is March 16 in Eastern Indonesia. There is two signs. The one says you can only use one door of the many doors in order to enter that mall, because you need to be sterilized. And there is also heat pistols that we will see later waiting, like wherever you go, in order to measure your body heat, the body temperature. And then there is also rules that relate to how you should pay, how many people should be in an elevator. Here it still says 1 meter of physical distancing, and that you should also wash your hands once per hour. Okay. Oh, good. Can you see a newspaper page?
Yes.
Yes, great. Good. Of course, also when you talk about objects and mediated artifacts, it's also, of course, the discourses. And this is another dimension that the orders of feeling try to attend to, namely, how do mass medias, I'm leaving the more dynamic social media so far aside, because that would add another hour of presentation, but also seeing how media reports are actually also transported and how they're communicated with colors. And here it's an Indonesian newspaper, also in Kupang in the east, in Eastern Indonesia. It says that people who might be infected with corona, and this is the 26th of March, might have already entered NTT, which is an abbreviation for Eastern Indonesia. So there was an incredible state of alertness, both through the signs that were suddenly put up in the city, through the newspapers, through sign postings along the street sides, of course, through online traffic, Twitter, and also circulating hoaxes. This just as an example of what I mean when I talk about signposts and how they affect human bodies and also the social lives that we in anthropology call the socialities. Okay, yeah, here we go. As much as these different signs and these different orders of acting, thinking, moving, and feeling make us adhere to completely new rules and norms, this presentation will also highlight, or does also highlight, that affects, feelings, and emotions are spatially and socially relational. Hence, they are susceptible to transformations that foster diversified responses that do not always reproduce intended outcomes of adherence, as we all know. As conceptual framework, orders of feeling focus on a discursive and structural arrangements, the emergence of new or the collapse of formerly established feeling rules within and between different social groups, cultural collectives, or whole societies. It allows us to focus on the emergence of slowly institutionalized political and legal imperatives of authorities that directly target the affective and emotional dimensions of human life and sociality. In its empirical application as an ethnographer, the concept can be used as an analytical lens to study affective practices that construct and shape local orders of feeling and individual and collective responses of falling in line, as well as the forms and practices of resisting or subverting these newly emerging orders. The following detective story on tracking corona signposts will exemplify some of these practices along the route from Eastern Indonesia to Germany. Here we go. So this is where the detective story begins. Since I'm neither a novelist nor a detective, let me clarify the title of my talk by defining some of the words that I'm using here. The first one is detective. The first one is tracking. By tracking, I mean to follow the trail or the movements of someone or something, typically in order to find them, or at least to have a say or have an opinion about their course, where something or someone is heading. The second word would be detective. Of course, I mean, there's, as to most English nouns and verbs and adjectives and others, there is a Latin rootings and origins from, and here it's the verb detegere, which means, or which could also relate to uncover or to expose something or someone. So the question now is, since I'm an anthropologist, so how does an anthropologist, not an epidemiologist who can rely on blood samples and other biological markers, track a virus that is empirically speaking not detectable to the eyes, to the ears, to the touch, to the smell, and to the taste? How does an anthropologist, who usually also relies on encounters, conversations, and sharing everyday lives with interlocutors over longer periods in time, conduct fieldwork in times of physical distancing without exclusively resorting to digital ethnography or discourse analysis? So this today here is not the context to discuss these very heavy questions for our own discipline, but mentioning them in relation to this presentation helps me clarify why I chose to focus on the arrangements of public banners, signs, and objects, and how they provoke emotions and reorder feelings through the format of a story. So this is the third term. A story is defined as an account of people and events told for entertainment, a plot or a storyline. It is also defined as a report of an item of news in a newspaper, magazine, or broadcast, or an account of past events in someone's life, or in the development of something or someone. So today I use the detecting or detective story to spotlight the theoretical potentials of studying orders of feeling by paying attention to signs and objects as I encountered them along a 50-hour journey between the city of Kupang and Berlin across 5 airports and 2 continents. So this is where the detective story begins. As you see here, as I said, I'd like to remind you that this is late March. So this is the 23rd of March, 2020. And suddenly everywhere these lines, these yellow lines started appearing. I got very used to them 2 months later now, but at that time it was very different and very new to the world outside the airport and inside the airport. So there were these lines popping up. And the company that runs the airport in Kupang really did a tremendous job really to set up an incredible measures of social distancing, as it is called until today, in order to physically distance human bodies, in order to prevent the spread of the virus. So here, when compared to other airports, as we shall see later, there is every 3rd seat is just marked as something that is taboo. So do not sit here. And it's also marked with a yellow cross in order to keep to the rules, to the new rules of the physical distancing. Then, interestingly, we have, you can see a screen at the very back there of this waiting hall of a rather small airport. And in that big screen, there were the new hygiene and physical distancing measures with emergency phone numbers were screened. They were mixed with warnings on drug trafficking and the consequential death penalty. There were signs, there were announcements of imprisonment after committing tax frauds. And all of that happened amidst an alluring video clip in which the tourism department promotes Eastern Indonesia's unlimited cultural and stunning natural heritage, like sacred houses, wood carvings, dance, skillfully woven cloth, coffee, Komodo dragons, volcanoes, scenic archipelagic views, colorful coral reefs, and stunning sunsets. As we took off, we were happy to be on the plane because, again, the Indonesian airline kept to, for whatever reasons, but they kept to the physical distancing rules. As we landed in Bali 2 hours later, we had a few hours to kill, so we went outside the airport and it was deserted. And for those of you who are usually frequenting some of the tourist spots, it doesn't have to be Bali, it could be for the Germans, Mallorca or any others, it's crowded, but there was just nothing. There was nobody there. So this was something weird because looking at all these beautiful signs and posts that welcome you to this island suddenly didn't make no sense any longer. Then, of course, the next big sign and billboards were the canceled flights, departure boards. So where 3/4 of the flights were canceled. You can imagine what kind of consequences that had for the people that were trying to find a way to get home or to get to their loved ones. Deserted boarding lounges and even the abandoned internet terminals left traces of the latest updates on Corona by Indonesian government spokesperson on the right and a YouTube loop of Islamic prayer chants on the left. On the bus, on the way to the plane, then a little bit later, we could also see signs everywhere that target the physical distancing, which, as I realize now, didn't really work out here, but almost. And then on the plane to Jakarta, which was the next airport, which was packed to the last seat, of international tourists and expats trying to get out of Bali, there entered an elderly Russian fellow, elderly man wearing a motorcycle helmet in the plane, and he refused to take it off, and he took a seat with the motorcycle helmet because, as he tried to explain to the stewardess, there were no masks available any longer on the whole island of Bali, as he said. So in Jakarta, again, these heat pistol gadgets, but also large-scale heat cameras that screen the body temperatures. I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. And interestingly, there were very creative educative cartoons produced by the airport management next to the check-in counters. So this was a cartoon that it changed the slides every 2 or 3 seconds, and it lasted altogether around 3.5 minutes, but I wasn't fast enough to get on the more interesting shots. So let me share a few slides that are actually relating to the then very prevalent practice of panic buying. I mean, the toilet roll is probably a European symbol for that. In Jakarta, in Denpasar, Bali, and in Kupang, it was the masks that were just not available. I think very similar to Germany also and other countries. So this cartoon says, oh yeah, of course, I have the better one. The next one goes on, says, oh, I'm safe. I'm not afraid of the virus at all. Then we have a superhero in a batik shirt. And then we have, I think it's Sri Mulyani, the head of the Ministry of Finances and Economy, who says, in the cartoon, who says, you don't have to exaggerate. If your body is healthy, you don't need to use a mask. Save the few masks that we have, symbolically speaking, for those who are ill. You don't need to panic buy. So you can already see also it's addressing us as passing persons, and it even uses emotional and effective words in order to emote us and make us fall in line into a particular way. And I'm not saying that that's per se a bad thing. I very much agree actually with what Sri Mulyani as a cartoon person is saying here. Even more so, if you're hoarding masks and you sell them with higher prices, then you are actually harming a lot of other people. Good. The Doha Airport, there was around 30 hours later, and since this was not a systematic ethnographic research, I didn't take much pictures. We all tried to get much sleep. We were also I was traveling along with our 6-year-old boy and my wife, who's also an anthropologist. We saw again, of course, loads of banners in different languages. And on our last flight to Munich Airport, because there were no flights to Berlin available, it was interesting to see how unprepared actually the very well organized German authorities were, because we landed at the airport of Munich, and what happened is that they kept the plane that was packed, was more than packed. There was no empty seat available. We were held for about an hour because a loudspeaker announcement very elegantly announced that there was a suspected corona case on board, and they needed to call the Federal Ministry of Health first what to do with this. So an hour later, there was an announcement saying that it couldn't be verified. There was probably no corona case, as if nobody had expected that. There was no corona case aboard, and that we could go home. So on our way out, another iconic object that I have encountered over the last 2 months also in Berlin is this red and white ribbon that also tells you to back off, to not go there, and to control your body movements with reference to certain areas, like also kindergarten, schools, public swimming halls, and so forth. Good. After a 5 hours ride with a rented car, then finally we arrived back in Berlin 2 days later. And here, this is the last around, I realize I do have a bit of time. It's about 9 to 10 minutes of this presentation. Here again, as we have encountered throughout our transnational journey through the hubs and airports, is signs and stickers and the Berlin trains that give you the 5 rules and suggest how you actually can keep yourself safe and also keep others safe in the public spaces. This is the oldest Berlin mall called Kaufhaus des Westens, which was closed then. Also trying to advise us, the very few that were on the streets in these days, to take care of ourselves and take care of others, stay at home, stay safe, and so forth. So you can see all of these, when there's hardly any people around, how much one pays attention also to these banners and signposts and all of these kind of artifacts that suddenly develop an effective dimension that I at least wasn't aware of before that, where the streets were crowded and when I was not actually suspecting a corona infected person behind every body that I encountered in the first weeks. Again, these yellow and white, what are they called? Bands, probably, here outside a takeaway coffee shop in Berlin. Inside a Berlin supermarket, this time they're red and white, actually suggesting that people just, get an onion, wait for another 2.5 minutes, move on, get a potato, wait another minute before the person in front of you is actually done, and so forth. I have not encountered one supermarket so far where that has ever worked, but maybe this is just because I'm in very undisciplined Berlin at the moment. There is no ribbons, there is no signs, but there is, you see the signs embodied through humans, actually. So it was very fast that people actually started to adapt to these signs, measures, and also the media discourse. Also, not putting my hand to the face is probably also one of these newly embodied orders that I have adapted to. But then also, so this is the end of the journey. This is now, we have reached it's 58 hours. It's the 24th of March. Now I'm going to take in a slight shift in a switch in focus and perspective for the last 6 or 7 slides. After a few weeks of lockdown and isolation, both in Indonesia, as friends and colleagues have also witnessed and told me through WhatsApp, through online media and social medias and others. But after a few weeks of lockdown and isolation, responses to these new orders started to become visible in the public spaces, not only online. Some manifested in displays and acts of solidarity. Others fueled into demonstrations and emergent protest movements. So on the left here, you see a Gabenzaun, which is probably a very poor translation, would be a gift exchange fence for the homeless. And on the right side is a banner in front of a nursing home saying, we stick together. We're going to get through this together. And then you see kind of the hands, and people could post their wishes for the loved ones inside whom they couldn't visit. This is now pictures from, and also the 2 before, they're provided by the editorial team of a blog, which is called Antral Metronome. Maybe some of you are also watching. Thank you for the pictures. I asked for permission first. This is a physical distancing party on one of the channels of the river Spree that runs through Berlin. And I was not aware of this until 3 days ago when I saw this picture. Then you could also see like materialized hashtags on wall, becoming more and more visible, more and more outspoken. And then on the 25th of April, there was the first large scale Corona demonstration in Berlin. Many have followed since, also over the course of Workers' Day and May 1st. And when we think about the origins or the onset of this journey, it's probably also very, I don't want to say similar or different or anything, but I think one can also put into perspective practices like these, where local communities are trying to fend off corona through rituals in order for its abatement, in order to cease. You can also probably understand why moringa leaves, who I also encounter a lot in Berlin now, at least in the organic shops, are a hope for medical treatment of side effects or of symptoms related to corona or non-corona. And also there is a silent walk. This is in East Java, also Indonesia. There were peace walks in early March organized against corona, even organized by the National Police Department. And last not least, we can see also an arts and activist collective based food distributions at the city's margins in order to distribute daily food portions for those who actually have difficulties in being taken care for, because there is, in some places, it's difficult to actually to be mobile, both socially but also spatially. And usually there are many, many communities also that are actually left behind, even to a greater extent that I can now actually understand from my rather privileged Schöneberg, Berlin perspective. I'd like to close this presentation with 3 last sentences, and then I'm looking forward to your questions and to debate. So the last few slides illustrate the new orders of what and how to feel towards whom, what, and where, nurture old and new forms of belonging and solidarities, but also privilege and exclusion. Once we have better come to terms with these new orders of formations of socialities, also as scientists, anthropological and psychological research will bear important contributions that scrutinize social, economic, and emotional hardships and endurances from a translocal perspective. Translocal ethnography invites us to learn from comparisons of the similarities and differences of being affected and responding to newly emerging structures and orders, and uses this knowledge for the shaping of socially just, medically humane, economically and ecologically sustainable futures. I'm looking forward to participating in this project, so thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Thomas.
Oh, there you are. I'm glad to see you.
Would you like to end the sharing of the presentation, maybe, so that maybe we need to go back to the one or the other slide later on, but for now, I guess we can just collect the questions the audience might have. But first of all, thank you very much for taking us on this journey, a long journey indeed. Like the audience, I would like to invite you to post your questions via the Q&A tool, which you will find in the menu bar below on the bottom. Pose any questions you would like, and then I will pass them on. One thing that I might want to start with is, since I know you and we have been talking about other things already, and that you also take yourself sort of as as participant researcher, and also like your affects play a big role in all of this as well. Like, how did that change throughout the journey? You sort of mentioned it a few times, that you observed changes within, like something that you got used to, something was new in the beginning. So how would you like describe what happened to you due to this journey? Like,
That's Meike. Thank you for asking that question. I purposefully I put it out of purpose, because then they're going to go, oh, Thomas, that's the guy again who's going to talk about his emotions. But I'm not. But I'm also doing that. And why am I also doing that? I think it becomes now, unfortunately, very obvious that a lot of methods are difficult to actually use nowadays. Apart from, I think it's also not necessary. There's other things to take care of now, like solidarity movements, engage in activism, and so forth. But still, from a scientific perspective, I do think that the taking your own emotions and affects into perspective, and how these banners and how these signs and signposts and all of these orders actually also have an effect on yourself as a researcher, that makes very much sense, because how would you otherwise try to make a theoretically, methodologically, sound and clean research on the emotions and affects and feelings of others if you do not take yourself into consideration, since we as researchers are also very much deeply affected by these orders. And I think the corona pandemic is definitely could be one example also in kind of coming up with more kind of multimodal methodologies that also takes our own positionalities into perspectives without overrating our own narcissist academic self, right? So that's that. And it, if there is, can I say one more thing?
Yes, we have 2 questions waiting, but let's go ahead. We have time until 3:15, so.
Great. I also realized in preparing this talk how, if you only focus on the science, and I was collecting them, throughout the weeks and months, and now I put them together, how deeply traumatic actually this can be. And I realized how that affected me. And I realized also that it's okay to be fatigued sometimes, and it's okay to be exhausted, and that it's just not normal to function, not even to a 50%, even as scholars. And you have mentioned the researchers' affects also. So with a few colleagues who are hopefully also tuning in now, we have kind of used emotion diaries, similar to other psychological tools that you have also shared with me, Meike, that try to bring actually and document also your own affects and emotions, because it can actually work and be productive in terms of an insight how affects and emotions develop over a certain course in time. It's like a historical, it becomes like a historical biographic document that does not make us forget how the beginning felt when compared to the today, 3 months later.
Yeah. Maybe referring to the beginning of the journey, one question is, was the journey prompted by COVID-19, or were you forced to travel?
Yes, I was painfully forced. I was embarking 3 weeks prior. I'm not going into detail now. I was 3 weeks prior. We were with the whole family embarking on fieldwork in Timor-Leste on something completely different. And then COVID just caught us. And interestingly, I more and more perceived myself as a carrier of corona when compared to fearing or being suspicious about others, because we were, at that time, it was so much a kind of Chinese and then Singaporean, all the hubs and European thing, particularly also the German, like Italian, Spanish, British, German thing, that I was afraid that we could actually be detrimental to the health of others that we encounter. So we were in self-quarantine for 10 days in a hotel room. And then we just looked for planes to get home. And it wasn't that easy to get a plane. So finally, we found a ticket to Munich that brought us to Munich, at least. And so here we are. So actually, we would be in East Timor now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We have another question, which is quite a long one. So I was wondering if the person who asked the longer question would like to join us here real quick, if that is possible. Let me check if this is possible with our background stuff. We can start maybe with the first. It says, thank you, Thomas. The term tracking you used points specifically to the spatial aspects on what you call as order of feelings. How do you approach such order temporally? How these objects in different places along your journey evoke different senses of urgency or crises or pandemic? Shall I read it again?
Great. No, I got it.
Okay.
I peeked into the Q&A. Hi, Ferdi. Thanks for the question. Yes, I think by chronicling and documenting it carefully, and also probably by,
There we are.
you can respond, Ferdi, by, chronicling it, like documenting it, and probably also in systematic ways. The thing is that I think the one thing that is through movement, right, that I described, it's the different spaces. I don't count the airports in between because not only Marc Auger said these are non-places, but the times in Kupang, Eastern Indonesia, and then in Berlin, the temporal dimension is just, I think, is key, and then you have the difficulty of juxtaposing or comparing it with different local worlds. But now that Corona is kind of establishing a world order, not only by, measures and advices through the World Health Organization, but also through economic stakeholders, governments, and so forth, I think we can compare different places through the lens of the temporality, and that needs thorough ethnographic, not only ethnographic, thorough documentation. Did that answer your question somehow?
Yes, because I kind of get the sense that at least from the visuals that you presented, there's somehow more relaxed. Maybe also relate in relation to the time also when you were there was like still at the beginning, but the announcement is I can sense it's much more relaxed than what is already happening in Berlin at that time, for instance, which is everything is much more urgent and the streets are quiet and so on.
Yeah, definitely. There was this when we were in Eastern Indonesia in Germany. It was already not the childcare nursing homes. Everything was closed already. This was not the case in Eastern Indonesia, but also there were no detected cases yet. We were still waiting. There was this kind of detective within me trying to wait for when does the first person get tested positive for Corona and what will happen in Kupang. Fortunately, it didn't happen. By now, of course, it's spread and there is dozens of openly detected COVID-19 patients. But at that time, it was really different. And also the difference was quite striking between the outside world and the worlds within malls and airports and all of these public spaces where somebody had to take measures based on legal notifications, probably by local governments and so forth, whereas outside life was very different. And it's similar here in Berlin. Thanks, Ferdi.
Was the second part of your question answered yet, or?
Actually, it's more conceptual because can you explain a bit like how is order of feelings in times of Corona somewhat offered a more concrete and eruptive outlook, say in comparison to Raymond Williams, like more nebulously and glacially formed structure of feelings?
Yeah. Oh, what a nerdy question. Thank you. Please stop me when I ramble, Ferdi. It is, I think, the advantages to more dynamic, yet at the same time more, and excuse my French, fuzzy concepts, is that you can at least assume by asking persons, by interviewing them, a direct link between an object, which is a sign, which can be also a legal text, which can be a picture in a newspaper, and the kind of effective reaction of persons, like what it does to them. And not only what it does to them, how that felt, it might be methodologically difficult in retrospective, but also to describe the behavior and the action and the measures they took out of kind of that emotional experience triggered by particular signs and signposts at the onset of what's happening afterwards. Do you form groups? Do you make these gift exchange fences? Are you locking yourself in because you have emotional difficulties in facing these things? Is it a mixture of all? So I think the orders of feeling are very interesting also when you would like to trace how new laws that would definitely come and are already actually on the way are coming into existence. And why are they coming into existence? Because of course they play with our emotions. They have to, because it's such an effective and such an emotional time right now. I mean, it's existential for probably 80% of the world population.
Thank you. We do have another question, which is about something you said. The question is, how does one interpret from one culture to another? What does that mean?
Oh, there's going to be a winter school next year, isn't it, Meike?
Yes.
But I mean, culture is, thank you for the question. Of course, culture is a tricky term for particularly anthropologists. If you understand, perceive cultures as something very dynamic, right? That can change according to the place, according to the people that interact with each other, and according to the motivations they have when they get together, when they share things online, when they talk to each other, when they build a cultural force in order to tackle something or someone, particularly in the context of challenges. I think one should definitely, what I would like to avoid is what's that word again? I've been out of campus for 3 months now. Is a methodological nationalism, that you say, okay, that's the Indonesian case, and that's the German case, and that's that case. I think that's obvious. But still, looking at the cultural practices, and then if you want to do that, I think it's very important to define what's your framework. So is the framework actually a local space? Is it a mall? Is it the mall culture in Kupang? So what's going on there? Maybe you would like to compare it with a mall culture in the Doha Airport or in the Munich Airport and so forth. I think the important thing, of course, the important thing here is that you identify very clearly how you understand culture and what your lens and your frame and your perspective is, and what particular phenomena you would like to take into consideration, and then compare them both in relation to the historicity, meaning kind of the historical development of that phenomenon, relating to political economies, how are these places structured, and also, of course, to ways and formations of how people relate to each other, communicate each other, and build and feed on each other's motivations and aspirations for future life. But that then is up to you, how you frame culture in your research and for your context, according to your research question.
Yes, that's definitely part or a whole big topic for a new winter school. I totally agree. We do have another question that says, how was the symbols used to convey the urgency of the pandemic in establishing a new normal between Indonesia towards your journey back to Berlin?
Okay. Okay, probably this could help here. This is Angi, hey! So this could probably also relate to trying to look for similarities. And I think it's easier to look for similarities in a first step when you deal with non-organic subjects. So like signposts, billboards, orders, because I think you can somehow try to describe them, and then you can gather them, and you can describe why you're attending to, let's say, these kind of warnings that I was describing, or kind of these recommendations that were constantly kind of, I felt constantly, every time there came a sign, I felt like a blow to, oh, there's another thing, oh, there's another thing, I have to do this, another thing. I think it's possible to compare this based on these objects and how they talk to us, because then one could also try to find out why particular things are actually mentioned and highlighted in the one context, and why there's others highlighted in other contexts. And then you could kind of start with a cultural interpretation of the phenomenon related to the legal frameworks, related to the emotional climates, related to the political economies of a particular place, and of course also related to the architecture of a place. You know, it was so striking, again, coming back to Berlin, and starting off with, you know, in Eastern Indonesia, where there is, when you talk marginality, of course there's homelessness on the streets and within many kind of places and spaces in Berlin. But when you see how vulnerable actually some communities are, not because they're simply not doing enough or not taking care enough, or because Indonesian national culture is neglective, or they try to avoid conflicts and so forth. No, but because simply the resources also related to the climate and so forth are just different. And I think I lost the red thread. So I think it's important to bring all of that into consideration.
If you want to follow up another question, feel free to post another question in the Q&A section. There's somebody who is sort of following up on me asking you about your feelings along the journey. So it says your journey's biography is very clear and very lucid. I'm keen to know about your introspective feeling while you were on those long flights. Any kind of claustrophobia?
Well, panic, fear, definitely. What helped is that our son, you know, it sounds absurd, but that our son was there. So I couldn't panic. I didn't want to panic. The claustrophobia was particularly kicked in Munich, you know, whether it was the exhaustion or somehow the expectation that being back in Germany, everything's taken care of. I just need to go to that car rental, hop in the car for just pull it off another 5 hours. But then everything collapsed. Nothing worked. It was a nightmare. We were all standing there in very little space. And that's definitely when claustrophobia and something that in Indonesia one would call pasrah is just like surrendering to a higher force, when that kicked in. Yeah, I could go on and on, but I myself, you know, is actually not the point here, but thank you for asking.
Second, I was wondering if Babette would like to join us for her question. I guess it would be nice to also like critically discuss that point. If you wish, we can like sort of invite you in so that you can ask your question personally. Wait, you can just like answer in the chat if you would like. Otherwise, I can also post the question for you. Just wait a second. Sure. Okay. She would like, she's willing to join us. So I would like to invite you to join us here and ask the question, which I think is a very good one. All the questions were very good. So I will also invite future people if we have the time. We have 15 minutes left. So we'll just wait until our technical support has managed to have Babette come in here.
Is it possible?
Great
Yes,
keynote,
we
by
hear
the
you.
way.
Can you hear me?
Professor Babic.
Greetings. This is fantastic. Thank you so much for this lovely presentation.
Okay, stage is yours. Feel free
Excellent.
to pose your question.
The question is one which comes from a fascination with ethnography and anthropology, and this very careful reading throughout, not only of yourself but of your experiences. And my question was to ask you what the dangers are. I'm sure you're very aware of this. Everything you've said has pointed to this nuance of interpreting the signs and signposts that you are reading. And I want to put reading in quotes. I happen to be, unfortunately, a direct student of Hans-Georg Gadamer. So I always look at that and I think, where's the hermeneutics? And the worry that I have is that one could be transcoding one's own response to what one is seeing, and there can be a difficulty. There's an awful lot written on this. I'm very aware, both in anthropology, ethnography, but also philosophy. And yet sometimes it can seem as if one can just go there and be, as Nietzsche says, a kind of creature spread out in the world, waiting for things to impact one, and then it happens. And of course, he's being critical. And so this is a slightly curious question, because I'm wondering, how do you avoid, since you didn't mention any of those other traditions, how do you avoid this in your work?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, very important, because I didn't pay attention to that at all in the presentation. And I also, since this is, I didn't want to start the presentation of saying this is not even work in progress, but it is. So this is something that I try to make sense of. And I think there is a lot. I mean, Gadamer, your own work, the works of, the post-Geertzian kind of interpretation of cultural symbols. I think there is a lot, and a very concise, actually, also theories and epistemologies relating to that. I would really rely on your suggestions and others' work, because so far I haven't grasped that yet. I'm aware of the traps, and I definitely try to avoid any form of projection. What I presented today was based on this, trying to come to terms and make sense of this weird journey, being on the road, being on the way, being exposed to movement, and then coming back to what you remembered as your home, which is also in a total limbo. I think that's another dimension to this that one should very carefully pay attention to in terms of exoticizing, romanticizing, and so forth. Instead of rambling on, thank you for your question. And I think there is a lot in that also, in terms of also communication studies and media studies that try to integrate the affect into the interpretation of the experience related to objects and signs. I'm curious in a discussion, Professor Babich.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for a very generous and kind response.
Thank you.
We have another rather difficult question, which says, how emergent or real are cultures in relation to one another? More specifically, are these distinctions ontologically real?
Yeah, they are great. It's cool. They are ontologically real. The moment they develop a force that is traceable, that is experientiable for particular persons in different ways. Because I don't know whether this is exactly heading where you would like me to go with this question, but let me just take another object or something. I didn't integrate it into the presentation, but what deeply disturbed me when we were in Kupang in NTT in Eastern Indonesia is that I came across in times of Corona and being exposed to the discourses and also to different ideas that were popping up at that time throughout the world, being exposed to different discourses, not being sure taking it seriously or not, is I encountered like little spits, like, that were brown and red on the ground. And then I at first I thought, hey, maybe this is paint. Somebody painted something. No, it's the spitting out of the salvia that is filled with betel nut, with kind of the remains of betel nuts. This is a cultural practice that is very obvious to many communities around that area in Kupang, but for me that was something I couldn't make sense of. And then I was trying to compare. Okay, so what would be actually what would be comparable to that? Why would you, if everybody tells you not to touch anybody, not to be too close to someone, why would you spit on the floor constantly? And it was not one spit; it was like a parking lot that was not covered, but that was very much exposed to all of this kind of human salvia that was just drying there in the sun. And I think these are things that are related to, what are they related to? They are related to the physiology, to the biology, of course, because betel nuts and leaves, if you chew them, they keep you awake. So why do you need that? Then you can ask the question, okay, what political economies are related to this, that it makes people actually chew these things? It's not just a cultural practice, it's a historically grown practice that has been shared throughout the centuries, also for reasons of the environment, so the nature, that plant is growing there. It has benefits in terms of gratification because it makes you more alert, it makes you work harder in the context of scarce food. Okay, so you can, if you take all of these different things into perspective, I think then you can definitely talk about culture, because what else would it be?
This is an invitation to follow up on this question,
yeah,
if you'd like.
Oh my God, I can already sense the, the very sharp response.
We can wait for a second, because this was the last question so far in the Q&A. Maybe I can ask another while we'll wait whether there is a follow-up or not. You already mentioned this. I am switching topics. It was just stuck on my mind when you said that traveling with your son sort of kept you from panicking. And also children, like now coming in from a developmental psychologist perspective, perceive things very differently from grown-ups. So how, not only not to panic, but how did that change your look onto things, like traveling with someone who is looking at things very differently, and maybe also is treating rules and physically distancing differently? Like, did that have an impact besides not panicking?
Yeah, it was amazement. Thank you, Meike. I'm still quite stunned by how much faster he picks up things, because I tend to now, he's at the age of, now you're the developmental psychologist, they're like turning 7. So I don't know what that means, but I'm just mentioning a number here. And so he was very fast in picking up, okay, don't go too close to other people. Don't touch when you're going somewhere. Don't touch your face, don't touch your nose. Of course, they do, but I also do. But it was incredible to see how fast actually he embodied some of these regulations and these orders that were suddenly there to him. I mean, I read, the Guardian or the Süddeutsche or the Kompass in Indonesia and so. So I was more prepared than him, but for him it was suddenly, we were there. There was something called Corona, and then how fast he actually adapted to that. That was amazing to see. And it was also amazing to see, because like 10 days or almost 10 days of quarantine in a nice but very small hotel room. For a family of 3, that's quite a challenge. And it was also, I mean, of course, we went for walks in the evenings and stuff, but when nobody was around. But also, I mean, how his drawings changed. That was also incredible to see. This was not a systematic task that I said, hey, come on, do the research with me. But it was just, he loves drawing, and then the virus just showed up. And there were, for a few days, there was this thing. He saw it probably while I was checking my mails and reading the news. He saw how this thing is actually depicted in the news. And then he started drawing these viruses. But I had the feeling, I don't know, that it never really impacted him because we tried to shield it off of his. But what it did with me is definitely abort the mission. Had I been alone, I might have self-quarantined for another 2 weeks and then kept going. But with a kid, no, that's the end of the research. There's other more important things.
I was just like, because I think it's also another dimension, like the everything you've pointed out, like the signs, the posters, the movies, the newspapers, but then also the talk with the people about these things, and by talking about them, they change. Especially when you explain those things to somebody who you would like to simplify what's going on. And this is kind of like, sometimes it's a challenging task to do that. And then like there's the historical framing, there is this change over time. There are the signs that interpret and get reinterpreted, and like all these things. So it's a very complex thing that one tries to make sense of. We do have another question. First of all, one person said that they actually would like to see the drawings of your son. So if you're willing to share those, I would be interested as well.
It's thousands. Yeah.
But we do have another one. Angie is out, and you called her, I think. Is posing another question. Interesting to find the concept of, I'm not sure if I pronounced this right, pasrah. An Indonesian concept of surrender to higher being, whether it is in cultural perspective or in theological perspective. Based on your experience, how is it differentiated? How does it differentiate the approach of people in Indonesia view on Corona?
No, I'm running the risk of culturalizing, which I won't go into that trap, Angie. So, but it's, I mean, the relationship of an emotion, of being at emotional ease, or trying to reach that, probably psychologically speaking, when you think about coping or dealing or enduring certain things and obstacles, and we are in this crisis, and whether we like it or not, mau nggak mau in Indonesian, it will just probably stay for a while. So in order to do that, I mean, what resources do you have? This is probably not only related to coping resources or coping styles and so forth, to kind of to the emotions, but it's very much related to what is possible. I mean, what other means do you have in some situations? I mean, when we were sitting in the plane, for I don't know how many hours, 2 days plus, and we were not the only ones. There's so many other, and this is not that I'm enduring incredible hardship. Let me tell you, I'm so not. I'm so safe here. This is just amazing how privileged I am. But also trying to understand when you're addressed and suddenly you find yourself in a situation where there is nowhere to go, nothing to do, then I think something which in Indonesia some call very critically, also with addressing their politicians, of just being pasrah, or just giving up and surrendering to a higher force. I think there are some situations where it's just not possible in a different way, but that does not mean that you do not feed on or try to promote solidarity with others. The moment that pasrah becomes a political statement, it's always becomes very suspicious. because, and particularly if it's used by cultural and political elites. But if it's used, I mean, in Germany, we would, I don't have a term in German to translate it, maybe, or in English, maybe someone would help us out here. It's fatalism in a way, it's actually just, yeah.
Maybe at this point, we can take that as a topic that would be worth discussing further, because we have reached the end of the session. Thank you for all the questions. And I'm sure if there are any questions that people would like to post via email, they can find you online and can post questions that sort of came up in this talk, so that that is another way to follow up. You're also welcome to join us on Slack to continue the discussion. So feel free to move around. Like this session will now close. And I thank everyone for the interesting questions. And Thomas, thank you very much for your interesting talk and taking us on this journey.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to the next 6 days.
Yep.
Yeah, great. Okay, take care, everybody. Stay safe, sound, and particularly slow if you can. Okay.